I'm Bob Brill. He's Erik Kramer. Welcome to Kramer and Brill, an NFL podcast and a video cast too. Each week we take a look at what's going on in the NFL, and during the season we analyze your fantasy picks. This week we're looking at the NFL situation as team by team and how it went for your favorite NFL team. And my esteemed colleague is former NFL quarterback Erik Kramer, who provides his valuable insights to this process. Now you can join us each week by finding the podcast wherever you get your shows, and your video cast you can check out on my Bob Brill YouTube channel. The easiest way to get to all this, just go directly to our website, kramerandbrill.com. That's kramerandbrill.com. All the links are right there on the homepage, plus past shows. So let's get right to it. Joining us this week is Nick Kosmider of The Athletic. He covers the Denver beat, and this year, what a beat to cover. Russell Wilson, a heavy primetime sked with 6 primetime games. So new faces, lots to talk about. And Nick, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Oh, man, we're looking forward to this. I know I talked to Erik earlier. He goes, there's a lot to talk about with this team. So you guys got a couple of nice surprises starting at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, that has been the question for the Broncos ever since Peyton Manning retired following the Super Bowl 50 season in 2015. They've been looking for his successor. They have had among the most turnover at the quarterback position in the league since 2016. And as you guys well know, especially in this day and age, it's very hard to win at all, and certainly almost impossible to win consistently without a steady elite presence at that position. And so the Broncos were once again in that same position going into this offseason, right? They had the number 9 overall pick, but they were staring at what was, I think, widely viewed as a kind of lackluster quarterback draft class. There weren't a lot of free agents out there to be signed that could be an obvious upgrade over what they had last year, which was Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock. There was the prospect of maybe bringing Lock back and trying, hoping that his 4th year would be the year that he could finally kind of figure it out. And then of course there was talk about Aaron Rodgers throughout much of the last calendar year. Would he finally decide to leave Green Bay? Would he be a natural fit? And those conversations amped up once the Broncos hired Nathaniel Hackett, the former Packers offensive coordinator, to replace Vic Fangio as head coach. So those were all the things that were on the table. And then comes March 8th. When I was on my way with my wife to Napa Valley. We were to have the briefest of getaways in this.
Just wine tasting, right?
Yeah, and then here comes this news that the Broncos have pulled off the trade of the offseason. They've acquired 9-time Pro Bowler Russell Wilson. And now Denver, that has kind of built this roster, right, that was only really missing the quarterback, or at least that's what they hope. Now they have that quarterback. And so that immediately changes the landscape for the Broncos in a very crowded AFC West picture. They're going to be right in the mix. So, yeah, a lot has changed since the last time I spoke to you fellas.
So, Nick, in Napa, were you guys talking Cabernet or quarterback?
No, it was funny. I mean, so that morning, it was March 8th. That morning was when, the news broke that Aaron Rodgers was going to sign a deal with the Packers. He was going to stay there. And so I'm kind of thinking, okay, we were visiting my wife's folks in Sacramento, so it was a short drive down. But we hadn't even gotten to the hotel yet when my phone starts binging like crazy. And so I had to tell her, okay, it's going to take me a minute. You might want to just go ahead and go get lunch.
I love it.
It's going to be a minute. So, But yeah, I mean, it just in one move, it kind of completely changes the picture for the Broncos. So it was definitely an exciting day. It's kind of hard to believe that it's really only been 2 months plus since that happened. It feels like forever ago at this point. And we're still 4 months away from the start of the year, 5 months, whatever it is. So still a lot to be figured out between now and then. But again, just a different vibe for the Broncos, completely changed. A lot of people around the franchise have compared it to what it felt like when Manning was there in terms of having one player who just sort of everybody gravitates to, and that he's the guy setting the tone. And that's what's changed so far.
I would agree with you, but with one exception. Manning was coming off an injury where he got cut. And so I think, to me, this is the best all-time off-season acquisition. And what happened to free agency? You don't even have to be free agency anymore to move, right? And so I just think that what George Payton, who was there in the personnel department with the Bears when I was there, and then obviously moved on with Rick Spielman, who was also with the Lions as a player, and then went to the Vikings there for a little bit. But I was real happy for George. Called him up and said, "What a great move that was." And
Yeah.
I think, to me, and I'm sure you and all the people in Denver think this is going to probably be, I think, their most significant signing ever. And,
Yeah.
and the fact that they also have Brett Rippon, I know he's not playing, but his uncle Mark absolutely shredded the Lions when I was there twice in 1 year.
There you go. Yeah, he'll be battling for that backup job with Josh Johnson. So, but Erik, I think that it's a really interesting point. I mean, you're right. We've seen this quarterback movement. You used to think this was kind of just the NBA, right? Where the big stars would sort of force their way into different situations, and it's become very much. I mean, this offseason, the Russell Wilson, I think, is the biggest move, but the cascade effect afterwards. You're talking wide receivers, quarterbacks, all these different players sort of forcing their way into different situations, and the team's kind of having to figure out how to navigate that. It's been fascinating. I do agree with you. I think that Peyton Manning has said since, like, little was guaranteed when he went to the Broncos, right? I mean, he signed a 4-year, $96 million deal. And I think there was certainly the hope that he was going to be Peyton Manning, right? He'd had the neck surgeries. He took the year off. He was going to be ready to go. But he certainly wasn't, he wasn't taking that for granted whatsoever. He had a lot of nerves going into that situation. And, there is just an absolute steadfast confidence with Russell Wilson that he is the same guy, right? And if you look at his numbers, I know a lot of people talk about kind of the down year for him. But if you look at the numbers after he came back from the thumb injury and then kind of was fully healed, so because he came back after only 3 weeks, which was really, really quick. About 2 weeks after that, he was still, I think, dealing with the effects of it. But the last 5 games of the year, he was as efficient as any quarterback, as productive as any quarterback. He looked like his old self. And I think when you pair his talents with an inventive play caller, Nathaniel Hackett, who's had experience working with an elite quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, I think that marriage is going to be good. It's just going to come down to, how well do they mesh together? What things do they take from Wilson's background? What things do they take from Nathaniel Hackett's background? How quickly can the offensive pieces that were already there adapt to this new outside zone scheme that they're implementing? Those are, I think, some of the questions that will determine kind of the ceiling of this offense. But they're going to be so much better than they were. I mean, this is a team that was led by a great defense under Vic Fangio for each of the last 3 years. But they just did not do enough offensively. Couldn't get over that 20 point per game mark at all. They were kind of stuck in quicksand. And so even if Russell Wilson isn't going to play at maybe the very tip top of what his career has been, even if he's right under that, that's going to be a significant improvement. And when you pair that with what is still a good defense, that's why I think a lot of people are looking at the Broncos and saying this is a team that has a chance to really compete.
Noah Fant's gone, Drew Lock's gone, Teddy Bridgewater's gone. You had Melvin Gordon stayed, which we all expected him to leave, and you got the Jerry Jeudy situation. What about Gordon and Jeudy? Where do those players stand at the moment?
Yeah, the interesting thing with Melvin Gordon was last year, that was one of the one things that the offense could kind of hang its hat on. It's that the duo of Gordon and then Javonte Williams, who was a rookie running back out of North Carolina last year, those two were really good. They interchanged well. They ended up the year, believe it or not, they both had 206 carries. So a lot of teams talk about sharing the load. The Broncos did it, straight down the middle. And so I think there was this idea that Javonte Williams was going to transition kind of into that lead role, but it wasn't going to be such that they were all of a sudden going to start, putting everything on him. They still needed another guy, and why not Gordon? Gordon, I think, thought the market was going to be a lot better for himself. 2 years ago, he signed a 2-year, $16 million deal. And this year he gets a 1-year deal that is maxed out at $4 million with incentives. So it's just the way it goes for running backs. You hit that 30 years old kind of plateau, and the league says, hey, this is just kind of where it's at. So, but they I think still going to be a valuable piece for them because they're still going to need to run the ball. Russell Wilson has been at his best in his career when he has a really strong running game next to him. I mentioned his strong close to 2021. That was when kind of Rashard Penny really started to show up for the Seattle offense. They started to really run the ball well. And so if they have that balance, that's when Wilson's going to be at his best. And with Jerry Jeudy, interesting situation. Obviously, he was, got arrested last week in suburban Denver. It was a second-degree criminal tampering charge, which essentially, sort of meant that, his girlfriend, he locked some property in his car. It was a non-violent incident. And so I don't think he's looking at any sort of significant jail time or anything like that, or potentially league discipline. But it's certainly not the way that they wanted to kind of start the offseason for a guy who they really need to be a big part of this thing going into his third year.
One of the guys, Nick, that both Bob and I were high on, even from when he got drafted, Noah Fant, finally started to come into his own last year. And now that he's gone to Seattle, what impact do you think that's going to have on this offense?
Yeah, it was one of those deals where it's like, you knew to get a guy like Russell Wilson, you were going to have to give up a lot. And they did. They gave up five draft picks, including 2 first-rounders. And then 3 players. Obviously, losing Drew Lock doesn't hurt you because you're getting back a better quarterback. But yeah, Noah Fant has been their leading receiver out of the tight end spot for each of the last 3 years. And Shelby Harris was a defensive end who's played really well for the Broncos the last couple of years. With Fant, it's interesting. They have a guy behind him, Albert Okwuegbunam, who was a 4th-round pick a couple of years ago. He's showed flashes, but has struggled to stay healthy. And that's why I think you saw the Broncos use their 3rd-round pick on Greg Dulcich, the tight end out of UCLA. And ironically, Erik, you were talking about George's career in Chicago. When he was in Chicago, he stayed in the basement, and I'll try to, I guess, say this the best I can. He was living in the basement of his former college roommate's brother, right? So his former college roommate at UCLA. He was also great friends with his brother, and he lived in Chicago. So George stayed in his basement. It was supposed to be a 2-week thing, ended up about 2.5 years. But that college roommate was the high school coach of Greg Dulcich. And so George, they had the UCLA connection, but they had an even deeper connection than that through this coach. So I just thought that was an interesting story. But watching Greg Dulcich last week at rookie minicamp for the Broncos, he is going to be a guy that fantasy owners should probably keep an eye on. I think he has a really good shot to kind of be their top tight end right out of the gate, even as a 3rd-round pick, because he fits really well into what they do. He played in a pro-style system with Chip Kelly at UCLA. So I'd keep your eye on this guy. Greg Dulcich is going to be, I think, a weapon for Russell Wilson in year 1.
The interesting thing is, I look at the draft, and of course they didn't have the 1st-round draft because they traded that. But outside of Dulcich, who you just mentioned, Montreal Washington, the wide receiver, and a center, Luke Wattenberg, everybody else was defense. Everybody, starting with linebacker, all over the place, linebackers, defensive ends, cornerbacks, safeties. Where was their mindset in this? Are they feeling that the defense is getting a little old, even though it's still good, they just need to bolster that? Or was that best player available?
I think a combination of the two, Bob. I think certainly they really do try to stick kind of to their best player available deal. As of course, all teams say that, right? But I do think that they are more veteran on the defensive side of the football, right? They're the bulk of their starters are veteran guys, and so each of the last 2 years they've really drafted to start kind of building the pipeline of defensive players. And their top pick, Nick Bonito, the pass rusher out of Oklahoma, is a guy where you look at what the Broncos have in the pass rush category, because that's the name of the game, especially in the AFC West with all these great quarterbacks. Is you need to have one, you need to have your own great quarterback, but then you need to be able to get after the other guy. And the Broncos obviously traded Von Miller away at the deadline last year, so they needed another pass rush threat, and they signed Randy Gregory from Dallas in the offseason. But he's had a long career of injuries, of drug-related off the field incidents that forced suspensions for him. So he's had trouble staying on the field. And then there's Bradley Chubb, the Broncos' 1st-round pick in 2018, who had a standout rookie year, but since then has dealt with a lot of injuries that have kind of affected his play. So they needed to get more depth at the pass rusher spot, especially because Chubb is playing on his 5th-year rookie option this year. He's kind of in a prove-it year if he wants to get another contract with the Broncos. So they did build depth defensively. They drafted another corner out of Pittsburgh and Damari Mathis, and that another defensive lineman out of Iowa State, Ini Uwazurike. So they've been, again, building that defensive depth, because as much as Russell Wilson is going to be a huge part of this, they still have to play defensively, kind of at that top 10, top 15 level, I think, in order to compete in the AFC West.
Well, given this division that you brought up earlier, where everybody's got the quarterback now, everybody's got a fairly good defense, so solid running game. Any sort of field coming in here with between these four teams, how things are going to shake out for Denver?
It's a great question. I'm so fascinated by the AFC West, and I think schedule makers are too. It's why you look at those Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, and you just see like a deluge of AFC West games, because that division, you could come up with any order, in my opinion, and you could argue that as the finish, and it wouldn't really surprise me. I think the Chiefs have to be considered the favorite until they don't win it, because they've won it 5 years in a row. They still have Patrick Mahomes, and even though they did trade Tyreek Hill, they still have a lot of weapons, and have also been there. They just, as you know, Erik, like when you have a team that wins, you learn how to do that. It becomes part of your culture. That's what they are. And then the Chargers with Justin Herbert, who's only getting better in his career, they added a lot of important defensive pieces. They locked up their wide receivers. They have Austin Eckler as one of the most versatile running backs in the league. And then you go over to the Raiders, who just when you kind of think everybody else had passed them by, they trade for arguably the best wide receiver in the league. So I am just fascinated by the AFC West. The order I picked it was we had to make our predictions when the schedule came out. And I did say Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos, Raiders. But within that, I think 3 of the teams in the AFC West will make the playoffs, and possibly a 4th. I think it's going to be that good, that tight. I think you'll see 2 teams win 11 games, another team win 10, maybe another one win 8 or 9. And I think so much of it will come down to just how much those teams beat up on each other to come down to it. But yeah, I've marked every single one of those games on my schedule as like, can't wait for this one.
Well, my son's going to love hearing that you think the Chiefs are going to win the division. Because since he's been about 7 years old, when LA didn't have a team, he became a Chiefs fan. So he went through about a decade where they won maybe 3 or 4 a year, and then now obviously the payoff is there.
Yeah, it's like those kids that you hear that like grew up. They turned 5 when Tom Brady became the starter in New England and graduated high school before they ever knew what it was to lose. Like it just you can't handle it. So yeah, it's Yeah, you have a lot of those folks in Kansas City over the last 5 years. It's who become spoiled. Now they're looking around being like, okay, now we're going to have to earn it.
Well, you're going to get a good chance to see this team with 6 primetime games, thanks to our guest, Nick Kosmider of The Athletic. That'll do it for another edition of Kramer and Brill. Don't forget to join us next time, wherever you get your shows, and on my Bob Brill YouTube channel.